This building to me is like a church. It represents everything that my life has been, so to speak. Why in the world would I put this away?
Hey, Ray.
How are you, man?
Good, good. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. No.
Okay, so originally, just the portion that you're in right now was a blacksmith's place. You see, so this is one building, right? The one you're coming out of. And this is the next building. Okay, so this building is a foundry, or was a foundry. It still can be a foundry. My name is Ray Smith. I grew up in Mexico City. Mexico City was amazingly dynamic. This was post-World War II Mexico City. It was about as groovy as you could possibly get. I didn't really discover, say, pop art and all of that until I started coming up into New York and things like that. In 1976 or 75, and I ended up meeting this teacher who was in Boston College, who was a writer and a poet, and he knew a guy called Paul Morrissey. And Paul Morrissey was the guy that was making the films for Andy Warhol. So in 1975, I walked into Andy Warhol's studio, and that blew me away. That was it. I mean, I just thought, at some point, I got to get up here. My grandfather used to say, why don't you always point at something? What's that? I attempted to stay in New York in 78. Yeah, there was no way that you were going to be able to live off of being an artist, okay? So, especially not a young one that had just arrived. But Soho was cheap, and that was a lot of fun. But it was too much of a toil. You had to drive a cab or be a waiter at a restaurant or something like that, and to barely make the $500 that you had to come up with to pay the rent was a bitch. And then I ended up going back to Mexico, right across the street from my mother's house, in Mexico City. I ended up seeing a building, and I thought, look at it, it's abandoned. So I'd learned the abandoned building shit here in New York, you know? So I thought, oh, wait, maybe we could pull this off. So I walk into the place. Okay, so it had the chairs and the tables and the bar and all of the different stuff, except that it's been abandoned because it never occurred to them to try and get the permit to get the restaurant. So you had a restaurant that was probably 30 years old that hadn't been touched. I thought, let's rent the whole building and see what we can do. We started making parties and then creating something that was, you know, artists' studios and events and things like that we were doing there, which was the kind of shit that was going on in New York. I was making a little bit of money off this building. So I started coming back up to New York quite a bit. In 1985, my wife and I had just gotten married. We were newlyweds, and the 1985 earthquake destroyed our building. So now it was no way home, go to New York. The most important tool in this studio is that machine right there. Yeah, well, so you're an adventuresome filmmaker. Oh yeah, come on up. Okay, so it's just up and down, okay?
Okay. This is so great.
See, so you end up with tools like this that, you see, it's completely perfect. You gotta get up here, I'm 12 feet up in the air. It's like a perch. Yeah, and I get to be able to see everything. We're in the Guanas Canal neighborhood. Originally was like these marshes that were in Brooklyn. It became an industrial canal, just factories all around it that were generally sort of like high-risk stuff, like chemical plants. But then in the 1950s, it began to sort of go bankrupt. This then becomes a very toxic, abandoned, industrial wasteland of sorts. But it wasn't until the end of Bloomberg that they had figured out how toxic it was, and then it was declared a Superfund site. The rumor starts coming that they're going to rezone it and they're going to permit tall towers. That's when the developers' money starts coming in. As soon as I got here to New York, I had a friend of mine who was in the building with me in Mexico. He'd moved to New York and was out here, and this was literally the edge of the world. This was a war zone, flat out. If the sun went down, you were inside somewhere. And one evening I got late and I ended up staying there, and in the morning, Suddenly we were woken up by the most glorious organ music that I'd ever heard in my life, and it was like we were inside the organ, and it was true. The guy that tuned the organs, one of the best tuners of church organs in the world, had knocked the floor out between one place and the other. And so he would tune the organs with Bach. You know, it was the closest thing I think I ever came to like a real spiritual awakening. There was these things here in the neighborhood, in this godforsaken place that was really cool. This is the kind of shit that I don't think anybody can do anymore. This is one of the most important things that I think was going on in New York at any particular period. I ended up walking into this building for the first time in the year 2000. I called a friend of mine. I said, how much is the rent of, warehouse space, abandoned warehouse space? He says, well, why do you want to rent? Why don't you come and look at it? And so I drove over here, and the moment I walked in through the door over there, this broker, young guy, probably in his early 20s. As far as I was concerned, he didn't know what he was selling. We're walking through it, and he's telling me how screwed up the deal is and all this other kind of stuff. So he's kind of like selling, but walking into it backwards. You know what I'm saying? Like trying to tell me all the problems at once. So as I'm walking in it, I'm looking at the height of the ceilings, and I'm just listening to this kid talk about it. And then I walked into this room, and I saw the height of this ceilings and the windows and all of that. And by that time, he'd finished his bad story. So then I turned to her and said, how much do you want for it? I didn't even think about it twice. Like because I had been here and I'd stayed in that evening with the organ music and the guys tuning the organs, I knew exactly sort of where we were, and I knew that maybe I had already sort of dreamt the place. So I bought it that evening. I loved it from the moment that I walked in. The quickest thing I ever bought in my life, actually. So it's 13,000 square feet. It was clearly also, had been like a drug den. There were mattresses on the floor and, human shit. And I mean, it was pretty gnarly. The very first thing we started doing was welding the metal onto the doors and keeping everybody out. Then the pigeons, it was a bit of a problem to try and keep the pigeons out. And a friend of mine had a pet peregrine falcon, and he perched the falcon in here. There were no more pigeons. That worked. And there was this guy called Edwin Salas who was just great. And so Edwin had a crew of recovering drug addicts. And so he needed to get them jobs. So in they came, and so we're cleaning up the place, and Edwin, who said that he had quit drugs because he had found Jesus and work. So now he's preaching down there at the canal. He kind of, broke the ice with the neighborhood relations.
I mean, gee, though, there you go. But you don't give him your ass, man. You got to give him that the Brad Pitt of Coyote look.
That mezzanine was created because this area flooded entirely with Sandy. So we got hit with about 6 feet of water. The walls are built I think probably at least a foot off the ground, because we knew that this place could flood from day one. But Sandy just completely overwhelmed us. Like even the water started piling up outside, and it just created so much pressure on these doors that they actually opened inward rather than out, and then poured 6 feet of water into this space. Over 250 pieces of art had been damaged and were floating around, literally just like floating all over the place. Eventually it kind of cured itself. And I actually really liked the paintings and the sculptures, in a sense, that got water damaged by Sandy. Those things were floating around because they're made out of laminated plywood, and they're hollow, so they floated. So they were going around the studio for about 3 days, floating in water. Then somebody suggested the only way that you're going to be able to get rid of the mold is burn them, and so we burnt them, and that's why they're black. And I love them the way they are. That's what I learned from Sandy. is that, holy shit, you build this whole thing thinking that you actually have something that is gonna, and it's nothing. Basically, you know, the way that all of this was happening, which is what made it exciting, is that in, you know, 76, the New York City falls apart. Yeah. Okay, and so everybody now has got all these ruins that we can move into, and we can sort of like start modifying things. Yeah. And that kind of made for this entirely different sort of, you know, environment. Do you know what I'm saying? So and there was something really cool about that shit. The places that you see the finest hope is in the places that are the most hopeless, probably. That was the charm of New York at the time, was that it was all like you had to build it, you had to invent it, you had to, you know, you had to piece it back together. I had all of this history, but at the same time, it was kind of like a bit of a disaster zone. Everything had been abandoned. There's all of the potential. So everybody had that particular spirit. This city has been the magnet of some of the most talented human beings on the face of this earth. And the thing that they're doing is they're getting rid of the artists. Octavio Paz used to say that language had different tiers to itself. And he said the finest use of language is possibly music. And then the one right now underneath that is probably poetry, because it's the song to the music. And then maybe painting, and then he says the very last one is law. I don't know of any artist, or very few artists, that can afford the rents and to try and stay here and hold on to the plays. You know, the entire city's being rebuilt. We're surrounded by nothingness on both sides of the canal. All the buildings around us were torn down, and they're about to begin excavation. Okay, well, right now you're getting the view that you're gonna get without us getting surrounded with monstrosities. So yeah, no, every time I look over here, you know, in that direction, in this direction, it just makes me want to vomit. What a horror. Here, the wonderful part is that they all have this language that pretends to want to support the art and the artists. And it's just the most amazing load of bullshit you've ever heard in your life. We'll build the building, and then it'll be so expensive for you to upkeep it that you'll have to sell it to us at the other end and pay the capital gains tax. You know, so then you go, wow, why didn't that kind of shit occur to me? There are developers that are coming to me and said, oh, well, we don't want to knock your building down, we just want to turn it into an event space. And I said, really? And so how much is that going to cost? And they tell you how much they think it's going to cost. And they tell you how much it's going to make, and that they're going to keep 50%. You say, well, thank you for the idea, but I don't think I need you. I mean, I think we're there already, so to speak. It developed itself. I really, really thank the developers for always underestimating the people that are there. To be an artist and for them to think of you as being crazy and dumb, God damn, that's the best camouflage you could possibly have. They want to just come in here and they want to hand you this money so that you can go someplace and retire. Well, I never had a job, so let's just start from there. It's almost like, okay, so if we sold it, I'd have money and I would put it in the bank. Well, I think I prefer living in my money. They don't get that. I have no reason to leave. This studio has never tried to be kind of inside the establishment, so to speak. This is like looking over the edge of the abyss. This is the bliss of the abyss. How's that?
That's an amazing way to end the interview.
Okay.
Thank you so much for watching. My photographs are featured in my upcoming photography book, Artist in Residence, which is my continued documentation of the last generation of artists who live in these incredible loft spaces across New York City, which is slowly vanishing. The best way to support this video series and these photo shoots is to pre-order the book in the description below. Thank you so much to those who've already bought the book, and thank you to those who watch the videos. It really means a lot to me and to the artists featured in them.